Hello and welcome to the Adventure Games podcast. My name is Saoirse Dunbar and I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 49 of the Adventure Games podcast. I hope everyone is well. Firstly, apologies for not having an episode released last week, but life and illness and jet lag got in the way. We were unable to get together, myself, Thomas and Laura, to record, but we will be back next week. Hopefully we'll all have recovered by then. And we will be back to review the latest adventure games we've been playing. Now, this week, we do have an episode, and I am joined by Sean Parker. Hello, Sean. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. Thank you, Saoirse.
Thank you. Perfect pronunciation, by the way. It's almost like we've been practicing, or we've been
like we've had a call before this one, maybe.
Yeah, so like we've discussed it before. But no, great pronunciation. And it seems like you have an Irish name yourself. So
I do.
So now this interview might be a little bit different to other interviews that I've done, because usually I speak to game developers directly about their games. But this week, it's going to be a little bit different. And also, I usually do interviews weeks and sometimes months before, but this time this is a Thursday evening my time, and I'm hoping to upload this episode on the Friday the next day, because you are one of the organizers of the Gabriel Knight 4 petition, which we'll be talking about. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it, because I think it's a great idea and I wanted to help as much as I could. But I suppose before we start talking about that, what I always ask everyone on the show is to briefly introduce themselves and say what are their favorite adventure games. So Sean, if you want, maybe people can get to know you, who you are.
Sure.
I think I can maybe guess what your favorite adventure games might be, but first, if you want to introduce yourself to people and then say what your favorite adventure games are.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm Sean Parker. I'm a filmmaker and a adventure game huge fan. And I would say my favorite adventure games, Gabriel Knight is pretty close to the top of the list for sure. I'm also a big fan of The Longest Journey, Broken Sword. Recently, finally played Grim Fandango and really loved that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gabriel Knight, of course, which we're going to talk about in this interview, and Longest Journey as well. I remember playing that, I played that several times, and Grim Fandango.
Wow.
And Broken Sword, as I'm sure people who've been listening to this podcast for a while know, that it is my favorite adventure game. Now, there are plenty of others that I love, including Gabriel Knight and Grim Fandango as well. But he just played that recently.
Yes. After kind of stepping away from the adventure game genre, not intentionally, for a better part of a decade, I've been finally delving back in and trying to play the titles I've been missing all these years. And boy, I wish I'd gotten back into them sooner, because it's like returning home. It's my favorite genre by far. Right. I'm also right now playing through the Blackwell series for the first time and really loving those. So.
Oh yeah, they're good. They're really, really good. I think the Blackwell games are some of the best games of the last number of years. And they're not really episodic. They're full length games, but in particular, all the way up to the end, it sticks. It's kind of like one continuous game, really. The story, how it continues. But yeah, really, really good. And then if you haven't played it yet, I would highly recommend Unavowed.
It is on my list. I kind of got into the Blackwell games because I felt like for some reason I needed to play them first.
No, that's actually a good point. Yeah, again, I know it's been out for over a year, but I won't spoil anything. But yeah, I think it's probably best to obviously play the Blackwell games in sequence and then play Unavowed afterwards. I think that's the perfect order.
It's been great to see how Wajidai Games has grown from being so small to making like such universally acclaimed kind of big-ish productions. So that's been fun.
They also publish games, like they've published games like Techno Babylon and Primordia and Shardlight, and I've mentioned as well that any one of the Wajidai games, whether they were published by Dave Gilbert or developed by Dave Gilbert, that they could be Game of the Year, any one of them at the time that they were released. But no, they are really, really love the storytelling in them as well, and the dialogue and the voice acting. Definitely some really good choices there. So we can tell that you're a passionate adventure game fan, like myself. And recently, you were one of the people who helped start this petition to get Gabriel Knight 4 basically made. So I just wanted to ask, first of all, the question would be is, how did this petition get started, and how did you get involved in this petition? Where did the idea come from and that? So I'll leave it to you.
Sure. Well, the person who originally started this petition, Tony, who I met about 5 days ago, just online, lives in Finland and I'm in America, and I don't think our paths would have ever crossed if it weren't for this, this effort to get this game series back to come to fruition. He has been part of a number of petitions over the years. He told me that he started in 2002 a petition to continue the Gabriel Knight series, which would have only been 3 years after the last game, and that got about 20,000 signatures. So he's been spending the better part of a couple decades passionately working toward this to happen. He loves these games as I do, as many of us do. About a week ago, Tony put up this new petition, or at least a draft of it, and he shared it on an adventure game forum, a subreddit, and was just asking if anyone out there was interested in taking a look at it and just kind of proofreading it or helping him just kind of clean the text up a little bit before it went out publicly. And I don't claim to be a master proofreader, but I can proofread, and I'm very passionate about this series. And I figured, well, sure, I'll message him and see if I can help, and we'll see what happens. And he wrote back almost immediately, very grateful, very excited, sent me the petition. I took a pass at it, changed some wording here and there, and sent it back. And we just kept going back and forth, developing it and discussing it. And it was like the first time that I'd ever discussed the series outside of like close friends, like with anybody. And it had been a long time since I'd had a serious discussion about the series. And it just felt really wonderful to be thinking about the future of Gabriel Knight again, and how it's long overdue, and we have a chance at bringing a bit more awareness to the fact that it is a wonderful series that didn't have the most conclusive ending, and we'd be over the moon if we could help do our part to get the ball rolling in a positive direction on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been over 20 years now, as you mentioned, that we've had Gabriel Knight 3. Now, I know it's not called Gabriel Knight 3, but I'm not going to say Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned every time. So to make things easier, I'm just going to call them Gabriel Knight 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, the box says Gabriel Knight 3 over here,
Does
so
it?
you're good. Yeah,
perfect. I knew that. Well,
I didn't put it there
then.
intentionally. Just kind of happened to be there when I set up.
Well, let's go with that then. No, I get exactly what you mean, and it is great that with the passion of fans and you guys and Tony to set up this petition and to get hope again. And you mentioned that he started petition back in 2002, and around he got 20,000 signatures, and that's really good, because back then the adventure genre was considered dead.
Yeah.
There weren't many adventure games being made at the time. Sierra had closed by then, and LucasArts was still, I think, more or less they're about to change direction themselves. So it was still really, really good. And now again with the petition that just started this week, But yeah, we can talk more about Gabriel Knight and a little bit shortly. This is just a question that I've seen online, and I know you guys mentioned briefly in the petition's website. But did you get the blessing or an involvement or anything from Robert Holmes and Jane Jensen, or can you say anything at all about this?
They're aware of the petition, and we have been in contact with Robert Holmes leading up to the petition. He has shared the petition and he has signed the petition, and they are interested, and the series is very dear to their hearts to this day. And I would say that if circumstances allowed for a new game to be made, that would be something that they're very much interested in. But for the time being, they really want this to be kind of a fan effort to test the waters and just see what the market is like right now, if there is a demand from enough fans for a Gabriel Knight 4 to make it a financial feasible decision, whether it's Activision or another studio or some other method of getting the game funded. So I don't know if I can say that they have given it the blessing in the sense that they have a wait and see approach, but I'm pretty sure that they are happy that people are passionate about getting this series continued. And they didn't say don't do this when we messaged them. They said quite the opposite. So that's what I can say on that front for the time being.
Sure, yeah. So it's, as you mentioned, this is a fan-created petition, at least for the time being, and I think it makes sense to see what sort of demand there is first before or if they get involved. So again, I think it's important to address, and I believe Tony addressed this online, but he was saying to people, don't contact him directly about this, that contact him or you, because he's been very responsive to people's questions online, which is great.
Yeah. It's remarkable. Every time that I'm in contact with him, I'll get a response back or two or three in a matter of minutes.
Yes. No, I've noticed that as well. He's very quick to respond, usually very responsive, and I've seen him on forums as well, and he's been answering questions. So then wanted to ask them, first of all, I imagine that most people who are listening to this podcast and this episode have probably played at least one of the Gabriel Knight games, are aware of the Gabriel Knight games, know who Jane Jensen is as well. But for anybody who hasn't played it now, I should also mention that there may be some minor, at least, spoilers for Gabriel Knight 3. So if anybody hasn't played that game, first of all, I think you should. Because at least storyline-wise, I absolutely loved it. We don't need to go too far spoilers on the main plot, but you did mention that there is a cliffhanger ending. But I suppose then maybe I threw my own question. But why Gabriel Knight? Why do you think that so many people want a Gabriel Knight 4, and why is there such a demand? You mentioned that there were 20,000 signatures that Tony got in 2002. So yeah, why do you think there's such a demand and people keep wanting and keep asking for a Gabriel Knight 4?
I think it's mainly because the games are just so outstanding, regardless of whether the third game, had that cliffhanger. And it does have a great ending, and then the cliffhanger is kind of this more personal stakes tag on after the main plot's resolved, which drove a lot of people crazy that we never got to see so far what really comes of that. But the games are at the top of so many people's favorites. You go to any adventure games website and check their reviews database, and you're going to see those having stellar reviews for the most part. It's a series that inspires just a genuine joy in people, whether they're a fan of a supernatural or historical or mysteries or adventure games as a whole. It kind of just has this perfect blend of all these wonderful elements that make up this really intoxicating story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, all three of the games, the story and the writing is such top quality. And I suppose, it's important. I mean, I started playing adventure games later, but the first Gabriel Knight game was released in 1993, I believe. And at the time, we had adventure games before that. We had Monkey Island, we had, King's Quest, and, there's Clarino. But I think I may be wrong in this, but I believe that Gabriel Knight was probably one of the first games that had such a serious story and that was very much like a top Hollywood movie. Because I think, games before that literally, were mainly comedy games. Gabriel Knight 1 for me felt like, oh wow, this has, voice acting from Tim Curry, Mark Hamill, and Leah Remini, and it was just one of the first games that was really like a Hollywood movie. And yeah, and then with, you mentioned that people could talk about joy with all of them, but with the second game, The Beast Within, I just started university and I had some German friends. And then when I played that game, and the story was, about von Ludwig and the werewolf, and I was able to talk about my German, about this game to my German friends as well. So, and there are also, books as well. I don't know if you've read the books, Gabriel Knight.
I read the first one quite a while ago. I wanted to track down a copy of the Beast Within novel for ages. I kind of have a strange little ritual whenever I go to a bookstore in a small town. I just quickly scan and see if they have to have a copy of it in there because it's so expensive on eBay. And then of course there's the new novel, or the shorter story of The Temptation that got turned into a graphic novel a few years ago. Have you read that at all? I
read that back when it first came out in 2015. I've forgotten nearly all of it. I'll be honest, because only 4 years ago, but
it is very short. But
but even till we got something, it was like, oh my god, it's a new story.
Oh, it was very exciting. I missed out on the news of it the first time around, and so it wasn't until I believe Jane Jensen posted it on our Facebook page last year that I finally noticed it, and I had it on my list of like, okay, I'm going to read this with my wife because she's a major Gabriel Knight fan as well at some point.
Nice.
And it took me until about a week ago to finally dive in and read it. But to get the first new piece of Gabriel Knight canon post the third game that hints at where the story is going to go next, I would say that has been kind of in a small way a shot in the arm for the fan base to be like, whoa, this could happen. Like, the story is continuing. It's a small step towards what could be, but we're liking what we see, and I loved it. I don't want to spoil anything about the graphic novel for those who haven't read it, but people who are a fan of the second game will probably be very happy with some of its story turns. And it is very short. It's just like, it'll take you probably 5 or 10 minutes, but I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, it's a very short snippet of, it's very intriguing that, it's possible now. We have something, kind of like snippets, of it. Then I guess my next question would be, well, I suppose, you mentioned as well, the other petition that Tony was involved in, and then on the petition's website, it talked a little bit about other petitions, and, it says that other fans have tried emailing Activision directly, contacting them directly, creating petitions. But is there anything that's different about this particular petition to the others that makes you think, okay, maybe there's hope that, there's light at the end of the tunnel, or maybe there is more of a chance that it might succeed?
I certainly hope so. I think one of the main things is that the landscape has changed a bit. I think the intent behind all Gabriel Knight petitions that got some traction so far has been pretty similar. But I think we're beginning to see petitions having maybe more of an impact. The way that they're spread around is they're able to gain a little bit more traction. I think a lot of the fans of the Gabriel Knight games, many of them are now developers of, like, they've grown up with these games, and like they have a platform as well. And so the great thing about this petition has been getting support from games developers. I hope I'm not botching the pronunciation of his name, but Cesar Bitar, who's the founder of Phoenix Online Games, who made the remaster of Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, he has put his support behind the petition. He's shared it. He's signed it. Robert Holmes, the composer of the Gabriel Knight games and husband of Jane Jensen, has signed it and shared it. And we're hoping that there's going to be many, many more. So to all you game developers out there who would love another Gabriel Knight, if you would shout out that this is happening, it could have a real impact.
Yeah, no, definitely. From what I can see from this petition is, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, is that at least, from the outside, it looks like it's been well planned. That, as I mentioned to you, it doesn't seem to be just a couple of guys who just got together over some beers. Like, oh, let's try and get another Gabriel Knight 4. Now this is from passionate fans who have seemed to have talked about it, planned it in advance, and as you mentioned, Tony, the organizer, has been doing this for decades.
Yes.
Literally. That putting your heart and soul into this, and it just seems to be well organized. And
I'm glad it appears that way.
At least to me.
Because in a lot of ways, it is kind of a couple of guys that just kind of randomly got together, chatted, and it's happening. It's happening very fast, but it's okay. It's something that we're just trying to hopefully be one of the early sparks that gets more people on board. It really is a fan effort, I think, that needs to happen. People coming together to just pledge their support and make their demand known for more in this series.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we mentioned, Tony's very responsive to questions, and he's been on forums as well, and with his, to email and on social media. Also, I think one reason why I think this may be able to get more traction than before is because of social media. That wasn't around back in 2002.
Right.
So if it's, if you could get 20,000 back in 2002, then, we'll see what can happen, because it's still very early days. It's still less than a week old, the petition.
Yeah. And I mean, even if we were able to get the same amount of signatures again, which
absolutely,
I think should be very possible, given how many new fans have come to the series since that one. Myself included. I didn't play the games until 2007 or 8. I was in college and just kind of was really getting into the adventure genre, and like I mentioned, those adventure sites, I'd check them out, see what are the best reviewed games, and it was adventuregamers.com that I fell in love with, and saw that it was one of the few games, Sins of the Fathers, that had gotten the 5 out of 5, and I was like, okay, I gotta try this one. Not just because of that, though, like the screenshots, like the mood that it was evoking were just so like, ooh, this is really cool. This is like this has got some serious art behind it in a genre that's full of games that are a very high art. This kind of stood out amongst those.
Yeah, definitely. As we mentioned as well before, the pixel art is beautiful, and even there were some small animations. When Gabriel Knight goes to visit his grandmother, and they hug each other. We don't see that in many games. Usually they just, I understand, because these animations, they cost money, and I assume, now, I'm not an artist by any means, but I assume they're difficult to get right and not look awkward.
Yeah.
But
especially pixel art like that. That's so nicely handcrafted. There's so many animations and details in those that are just one-off little moments like that. And it really does make a difference, I think. And you see that in the environments as well. Like right off the bat, there's the wonderful cutscenes that open the game, but then when you have your first playable sequence and you come out into the bookshop, and I was just kind of like, I was overwhelmed by the vastness of the space. It wasn't a huge area, but it just felt so big because it was so richly detailed, and there's so much stuff you can do. And then you've got, I don't know, 8 or something verbs you can use on everything. It's just like, wow, that was kind of cool too. Just the complexity that they were able to bring to that game while straying away from some of the obtusiveness of games prior that were complex. This game, it was complex, but it was just so well designed. I don't know. I
agree entirely, and I feel the same for that, and the 3 games. I know that with the 3rd game, I know it's some people had issues with the 3D graphics and maybe with some of the controls. Although I liked the controls once I got used to them. But as as I mentioned, with the storyline in all three of them was what really, grabbed me, and how ambitious all the three games were. Then I suppose then, we've spoken about the games a little bit now, and we've spoken about the creation of the petition. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the main objectives of this petition. Now, obviously, we want to get Gabriel Knight 4 to be made, but I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, as much as you could, how you going about this in the petition. What objectives do you have to create awareness and to get the, hopefully the ultimate goal is to get the game made. So is there anything you can tell us about that?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that the main thing that we're really trying to hone in with this petition, first and foremost, because we think it will help get to the ultimate goal of getting it made, is we want this petition to just send a message of positivity from fans, from developers, from people who've enjoyed these games, and it's kind of a way of saying thanks for all that's been made so far, and that we hope more gets made. It's kind of easy to see in all spheres of culture, really, and gaming is no exception, that there can be a vocal, sometimes toxic side of fandom, where you'll have maybe a sense of strong desire for a new game that ends up coming across more like a forceful demand or a threat, or you owe us these games, we need these games, we're entitled to these games, and it's very easy to succumb to that line of thinking. It's human, and we're trying to avoid that here. We're trying to really make it a message about, if there's a possibility that more games can come out, that's wonderful, because they're excellent, they're so gripping. But what we've already gotten is great. If this is all we get, everyone will be disappointed because we want more. But
I think I get what you mean. That it's at the very, this is as well as trying to get Gabriel Knight 4 to be made, but it's also a celebration of the three games that were made before. I mean, to show our appreciation.
It is. The last thing that we want to do with this also is to put undue pressure on Jane Jensen, Robert Holmes, all the talented people that worked on these games, because we also don't want the games to be made without them, and we don't want them to be made without them wanting to make them. I think part of that, from just being an artist myself, sometimes you need a little encouragement from people telling you how meaningful a game was to them, or anything that you've made. And if we can kind of reframe the discussion around like celebrating the legacy of these games and hoping for a bright future for new audiences to discover them, and hopefully future games that are made from it, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if nothing else, the objectives are very positive, as you mentioned, that to be positive, to show how much we love these games, but as you mentioned as well, not to put undue pressure on Jane Jensen or Robert Holmes, or I would say, you have to make these games for us, the fans. We're entitled to them. It's like, no, we want to show you guys we really love the work that you did, and if possible, maybe if you want to make a fourth game. But I get from what I've seen over the last few decades that they want to make a fourth game, that they plan to, but circumstances have prevented them so far.
Right.
Now, I wanted to ask you this as well. I don't know, because I noticed some people had this idea about, petitions that, there is this opinion as well that, oddly enough, if a petition is too successful, that maybe a company might just sit on the game or on the IP. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts would be. Do you think that a petition can be too successful, or because I have thoughts on this myself. I don't necessarily agree, but I wanted to just check, what your opinion was on that, if I make any sense.
Yeah, sure. I think we do need to be sensitive about making sure that our petition gets the right message across. If it spreads far and wide with a misrepresentation of what the current situation is, then that could be very bad. We definitely want it to, as I said, not pressure Jane Jensen or Robert Holmes into taking any official position. With Gabriel Knight in particular, I know there's a lot of series out there where the developer is kind of the champion of the series, and everyone wants a game to be made with the developer or not at all. Gabriel Knight, I want to say, I can't speak for anyone other than myself, but I have a strong inkling that of all the franchises out there in adventure gaming, there would be the biggest backlash if a new Gabriel Knight game were to be made that didn't have Jane Jensen or Robert Holmes. Like, they are the soul of these games. Like, they're so well written. The music is wonderful. Like, I haven't played them in a long time, but I still have the soundtrack come up on regular rotation here and there, and it's always a joy to listen to. It really takes me back. These games are beloved for a reason, and the awareness of Jane Jensen as the creator is, I would say, pretty high. So I'm hoping that if the petition's success were to make the rights holder, Activision, choose an action that maybe the fans aren't as happy with, that would be unfortunate but odd at the same time. I think really the only way for this to make sense is for them to find some way to work with Jane Jensen, find a way for either her to have the IP so she can do what she desires with it, or make some sort of a deal where there's a lot of creative freedom given to her, without too high of without huge budgetary restrictions or anything like that. Speaking on that subject, the third Gabriel Knight game, which I also really enjoyed, but came into it knowing that there was some fan backlash against it, and one of the reasons was because there was a huge amount of pressure put on that team to deliver a product for a changing age using technology that they did not have a whole lot of time to get familiar with, and not a whole lot of money to do the original vision had to be scaled back down. Lots of parts were changed. There was the infamous cat hair mustache puzzle, which was not part of the original design. And there's honestly, I have a real soft spot for goofy things like that in the games, but really we want these games to be given the love and respect, the series to give the love and respect it deserves, to get an opportunity to be made properly, to not be made as a rush job or some kind of cash in. Like, this is something that has legs. I mean, it's endured. It's 20 years later, and like, you and I couldn't be more excited that this petition is spreading like it is. And who knows what will come of it. It's hard to say, but these games could attract decades and decades of more gamers in the future to play them.
You mentioned that in the third game that there were issues, but then there were behind the scenes reasons for that. They were under a lot of pressure. It's
sad that there's not as much awareness about the reasons behind those issues as there is of the issues themselves. I've read a lot of articles about problems that Gabriel Knight 3 faced, and I've seen it blamed for, even though the adventure industry was really struggling and was being phased out, some people point at that as the reason why it died, because of this ridiculous puzzle, or this is way too much money to spend on something that's so niche. It's tragic, because I really don't think that is true at all of what the reality of the situation was. It would be great to prove that with a new game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To get Gabriel Knight 4 could ultimately prove, the adventure game genre isn't dead, which even still to this day, some people believe, including some game journalists. And I'm like, in 2019, there were 180 quote-unquote adventure games released, at least adventure gamers had down as adventure games. And that's not including unfinished episodic games or narrative games that maybe they didn't consider adventure games because maybe they're too too much action or whatever.
Right.
So I think now it might be the best time as well, because there is a demand for narrative games, and the Gabriel Knight games, as you said, had some of the best narratives of any games.
I mean, that was really the main appeal of them. I mean, people love adventure games for a variety of reasons, puzzles being one of them, and just kind of the gameplay. But really, I mean, Gabriel Knight, the writing, the story, the characters, that's stuff that can work outside of the traditional confines of a point and click, and it already has in the series. Each game was pretty unconventional, changed dramatically from the previous one to keep up with the times. I don't know if that means what form a new game could or should take. I'd be overjoyed with a return to the classic point and click style. It could be 2D, it could be 3D, it could be who knows? Maybe they could do another live action one. But really, people just want good stories.
I know what you mean about 2 decades later, we're still talking about these games, and we're still excited about this petition and the possibility maybe of a fourth game. But even still, we're just happy to talk about these 3 games like we are doing now, and it's, we talked a little bit about Gabriel Knight 3, and that's, some of the issues, you mentioned the cat puzzle, but Jane Jensen apparently was not involved with that puzzle. She did not create that puzzle.
Right. I think it's remarkable that, knowing what was happening behind the scenes, that they were able to make what they did and make something that was still. I find people online all the time in the forums who talk about Gabriel Knight 3 as their favorite of the series. I don't really know if I have a favorite of the series. That each one has so many wonderful, unique qualities about it, partially because the technology was always on the cutting edge with these games, and totally changing the style and just how the game worked. But just, the fact that they were able to create a working product despite what happened is great. And I think it's easy for us to kind of hone in on what we consider shortcomings and how they might, bring down the whole experience. I think in a way it kind of speaks more to just the sheer creative ingenuity that people who worked in these games were able to come up with under very stressful circumstances. And hopefully that won't have to be repeated in a fourth game, or the circumstances are a lot more conducive to the game being developed as it is, if it does indeed exist, developed to its original vision, and not have to suffer too many compromises. Certainly no 11th hour, oh no, we're running out of time and money and we have to do this completely different kind of thing. So that's another message that we would love to come up through loud and clear through the petition to Activision, that we just want these games to be done right, if they're done at all, and we really want them done.
Yeah, of course, that's an excellent point, I think, because as much as we want a Gabriel Knight 4, we also want it done well. It's we don't want it, as we talked a little bit about the issues behind the scenes of Gabriel Knight 3. We'd hope that Jane Jensen and whoever else is working on the game don't have to go through that amount of stress. And again, it is remarkable that Gabriel Knight 3 was A, released, and B, was that it was as good as it was, even despite the issues. And I would nearly compare, certainly with maybe the behind the scenes issues, more modern times, with The Walking Dead, the final season, because it was midway through that game, after episode 2 of 4 episodes. That was when Telltale collapsed. So everyone was unsure if we would even get to 4 episodes and get to find the end of Clementine. Now, ultimately we did, and I spoke about this on the podcast as well. But what was remarkable with that game is, maybe similarly, behind the scenes, it must have been turmoil, because the people working on the game, again, not knowing about their own futures, with the company that basically doesn't exist anymore, and still they were able to
Sort of.
work on. Yeah, kind of. I mean, it exists kind of now. About the time it had just collapsed, and
Yeah.
they were still able to make a really, really good game. And similarly with Gabriel Knight 3, that Sierra was, the industry was changing at the time, and Sierra was going through changes, and it was a big budget game for the time. So hopefully, again, they won't be under as much pressure. If they do, if we can get them to make the game, if we can get Activision to agree to make it. So then, for example, let's say if Activision see the petition and see however many signatures there are, and they go, okay, we'll be happy to talk to you guys, about what you guys want. Do you have any possible plan or any objectives then of what you guys might say? Or again, I don't know if you can answer this, if this is too far down the line. Is there anything that you can say again if Activision did say, okay, we're willing to discuss the possibility?
I think at that point our job would have been pretty well complete, and our the best thing we could do is get out of the way and let things happen as they should. Hopefully with Jane and Robert being able to discuss at that point what the future of the games would be. We just want to get an opportunity for that to happen more than anything, and then leave it up to them what the plan going forward is. I mean, I'm sure I could list off a whole bunch of things I would love to see in a fourth Gabriel Knight game. There's so many directions you could take it, but ultimately I want it to be her vision. I want it to be what she's currently got a burning passion to tell a story about. Or maybe she learned some amazing historical things about some place, and like it's a story that hasn't been told properly before, and she can work it into Gabriel Knight. Like, it's great. I want surprises. It can be anything really, because I have full faith in what she would do. I mean, just getting the little hint of the future of Gabriel Knight from that short story and graphic novel, I was immediately just taken right back into, like, it was like, oh my gosh, 12 years have passed since I was like fully invested in this universe. Like, it all is just rushing back, and it felt so great. And it's like, yeah, of course she's got the magic touch still. Like, we just want whatever she's going to make without too many external, financial or timeline kind of obstacles. We just want it to get made properly.
And she's still writing. I think it's important to say. It's not that she's stopped writing in the last 20 years, because she's written books. I read one of her latest books. I believe they're the Elizabeth Harris mystery novels, which was really good. She wrote a second one. Now it's very different to Gabriel Knight. There's no supernatural murder mystery, but with the Amish people, which is a very interesting setting, but it works. I really enjoyed it. So it's important to note as well that she hasn't just stopped writing after Gabriel Knight 3. She's still writing, so she still has, as you mentioned, the magic touch, that she still has it. I believe that she's still working away. But then because then with petitions, because I know some people that they might say that, petitions don't work, but is there any precedent that you know of petitions having worked in the past?
I think in recent years we've seen a couple titles come about in a way that maybe you could point the finger at petitions starting that off. I believe that the remastering of Broken Sword was due to a petition, or at least kind of things started out with that. I hear that there was Resident Evil 2. There was a remake of that, and that was made because of fan demand. People have been asking for that for years. I'm pretty sure a petition started that off as well. So I don't know if it's necessarily if petitions have a huge precedent or not. It's really about proving fan demand. I'm hoping that the petition is a small part of that strategy of getting people to make some positive noise and cheer for Gabriel Knight, to prove that this is something that people are eager for.
Yeah. definitely mentioning Resident Evil 2, and I didn't know about Broken Sword, but
I didn't either. It's something that Tony told me about, and so it's interesting though. And Broken Sword, it's another series that went on a long hiatus, and it had some. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Gabriel Knight in some of its development history as well, and how it changed with the times. And then I don't remember how long of a gap there was between the fourth and the fifth game, but it had to have been like close to 10 years or something like
years at least.
and
there was a few years of gap,
yeah, and so that came back because it was a financially feasible decision because people loved the first game so much. I mean, or so I hear. I mean, I might.
No, you're definitely right. No, you're absolutely right. Even nowadays, people still asking for a Broken Sword 6. We've had 5 Broken Sword games, and people are still asking Revolution. Some maybe demanding a Broken Sword 6. So there is still, demand. And this year as well, we're going to have Beyond the Steel Sky, about 20 years after Beneath the Steel Sky, and there was fan demand for that game as well.
Right.
And yeah, you mentioned Resident Evil 2 and 3, and then going outside of adventure games. Now I don't know too much about this, but I believe there was it Star Wars: The Clone Wars, that when Disney took over the rights, they cancelled that series at first, but then because of fan demand, they brought it back. Or one series. I think it's an animated series. And then from what I remember with Activision, the company who we are petitioning, I don't know if you remember, but I'm going to say a few years ago, it was probably more like 10 years ago or more, that I think it was Phoenix Online that you mentioned, Cesar, that they were making an unofficial sequel to King's Quest, which was episodic.
Oh, the Silver Lining.
Yes,
right?
That's it. And I think midway through the development of that series, Activision, or Vivendi at the time, I don't know if they were Vivendi at the time, but they sent a cease and desist letter. But then there was a petition. A lot of people signed it. So then Activision then spoke with... Now, again, this is from what I've heard. I was not directly involved, so I may be wrong on a few details. But from what I know, Activision then spoke with Cesar, with Phoenix Online, and then they agreed to let them continue developing the King's Quest. So, that's that's something that worked at the time. So
yeah, and then I think that kind of led to a new official King's Quest game afterward, because clearly people were invested in that universe still. There was a demand to have more, and then more was made.
No, you're absolutely right, because that came as quite a shock, at least to me. But yeah, they then made an official King's Quest game, and they threw some money at it. They had Christopher Lloyd as King Graham, and I think they marketed it. I haven't played those games yet, although I do have them, I think, in my library.
Yeah, I haven't either. I know they're a bit different, with the episodic and the 3D and all that. And it wasn't developed by Phoenix for that official one, I believe.
The Odd Gentleman, I believe. I don't know too much about that studio.
Did you ever play the Misadventures of P.B. Winterbottom?
No, but I've heard about it.
It's not an adventure game, but it's a pretty lovely little title. Really enjoy that one. Great music.
I'm sure. No, I've heard about it. I don't know too much about it. Another reason that kind of gives me some hope. I think it's important to say we don't know what's going to happen, but a few years ago we mentioned before that Jay Jensen made a 20-year anniversary, the remastered version of Gabriel Knight 1. Yeah. But again, that came about. Activision allowed them to make that kind of a thing, test the waters. But while it's not Gabriel Knight 4, which is what we all want, it was something. So it's not like the last, because you mentioned as well that since 2002, the last time when Tony had this petition before that, in that intervening period, there's been a lot of change. And even I'm sure with personnel and Activision, that there are some people who still, are testing the waters.
Yeah, I mean, that game came out, I believe it was 2014 or or 2013 for the 20th anniversary. That's not all that recent now. We've had about 6 years pass. The gaming landscape can change quite a bit in that amount of time. And I think it's important to know that that game, despite not meeting expectations to carry the series forward from the momentum that remaster got, it's not necessarily indicative of where a Gabriel Knight 4 would land in terms of being a commercial success, because as you mentioned, the fans, we've already played Sins of the Fathers. We love it as it is. It was really cool to have the game remade in the way it was, get back into the spotlight. Ultimately, I don't have any complaints there, aside from that it hasn't led to a Gabriel Knight 4 yet. And so I know that there's a lot of fans who passed on that remaster, who are absolutely interested in a fourth Gabriel Knight game because it's just it's a remake of an existing game. It's the same story. There's some plenty of new material added in, but we're so attached to Gabriel's journey. We want to keep it going forward. We don't want to be told the same thing, or go. Maybe people would be happy with going back in time with a prequel. I don't know.
Possible.
Probably not. Unless it was one of his ancestors, maybe.
Well,
that could be an interesting
that.
prequel. Because one of the great things about Sins of the Fathers is that character arc. Gabriel goes under such a huge but believable change. I mean, he's really a jerk. He's such a ne'er-do-well in the beginning of the game. He's likable. He's funny. Like, you want to spend time with him because you're not seeing him in real life. But by the end of the game, like, you realize, like, by the end of the game, he has to confront a whole bunch of personal demons, kind of more so than anything else. And that character arc he undergoes is, and how he changes going forward. And that's kind of like the new person he is. He's still got a lot of his old personality, but he kind of get the sense that he's taking life seriously. Now he's got a purpose, a destiny, and it's fascinating. You could use that as a launching point to make 20 games or movies or books or shows. Like, it's just such a great setting. And I don't know if this would appease everyone. I'm sure it wouldn't appease everyone, but I'd be okay with just seeing the Gabriel Knight story being told in different mediums. I mean, we've already gotten books, and they work. It's worked great on the page. I remember the first book maybe was, some people said it was a bit too close of an adaptation.
Yeah, I felt a little bit like a walkthrough. But I still liked it. I still enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's got to be like the best walkthrough ever made, if that's the case.
No, definitely. I think there were certain parts that, were kind of a bit gamey. That when you're in the game, when you're playing the game, that you don't really think about because we're so used to.
Right.
These kind of puzzles, like distracting the police officer from the motorbike with the mine, but then reading the book.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is a bit awkward when it's in the book. Now, I still enjoyed it, but I think she did better in the second book.
Which is the one I really want to read.
I think I have it somewhere. But she then made some changes to the game that made it feel more natural, the story more natural. But yeah, no, absolutely. And you touched on what I was going to ask as well. If we couldn't get a Gabriel Knight 4 game, I was going to ask, would you be happy with a novel? I certainly would. Okay, I prefer it to be a game. That's, I think, what we all want. But then if Activision just gave the rights to Jane to write a book, I'd be happy enough with that. If we could get the end of the story in some form, or a graphic novel. Now, I think we all would love a game, of course. I think anything at all at this stage, and we know what happens.
Yeah. But, I think more than anything, it's kind of the knowledge that there was more that could have happened with this series if the rights weren't an issue, and we don't really know what direction that would have taken, but it just kind of, there's something about this campaign that I think fuels a lot of people, and past fan petitions as well, is there's this sort of sense of this is what's right. The
Hmm.
rights are being sat on and not really used. Let's give them to the creator, and she can choose if she's gonna do something or not. If she sits on it too, that's fine. We don't want a forced story or anything like that. But if there's a chance that there are some great Gabriel Knight stories just kind of in captivity that could get released by this transfer of rights or a positive partnership, what more could we ask for at that point?
Right. Absolutely, because Activision right now are just sitting on the rights and not doing anything. But we in the intervening time we've had a new King's Quest game, and then Kickstarter came along, and Tim Schafer came along and changed the landscape as well of narrative and adventure games. So we got
Yeah.
things because before, like I think before 2012, I'd never expected even Tim Schafer to make another adventure game. We got a new Tex Murphy game and even a new Jane Jensen game in the cold. So these are, for me, examples of things that I never thought we would get.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what it's sort of challenging, so because we know that Jane Jensen has tried before, but I think it's I feel like it's possible.
Yes, it is possible.
That's the frustrating thing, that I don't feel like it's impossible, that no, it will never happen, that we've
Because there's
gotten
been
these.
such precedent for it happening
Yes,
time and again in this era of beloved properties and beloved game creators coming back to do uh,
yes,
what what they do best. And why should this be any different?
exactly, because Tex Murphy ended on a cliffhanger about 20 years ago. They came back and were able to make it and at least finish that story arc, and we're getting another Tex Murphy game, I believe, this year or next year as well. So it seems like we're getting beloved properties, except Gabriel Knight so far. But
Yeah.
I mean, my feeling is that whatever happens, whether it's successful or not, in the end, it's still possible. But another thing that I saw, people, now I won't keep you too much longer, I promise, but
Sure,
it's
sure.
that some people mention is because it's been 21, 22 years since the last Gabriel Knight game was released. I wanted to know your thoughts. Do you think that then it would, if there was a Gabriel Knight 4, that would it meet expectations of some fans? Do you think? Do you think that, or would our expectations be maybe too high for a Gabriel Knight 4? I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
I think that's a really great question. Having a new Gabriel Knight game alone would be something that it's something that a lot of people unfortunately have given up hope on even having. They feel like their hopes have been dashed one too many times over the
Right.
last 20, 21 years, and it's totally understandable. This campaign too has seen, it's natural for there to be some skepticism because really it's still just a small fan effort right now. It's just the two of us and some others that have contributed some feedback, just trying to bring some awareness back to this series, and not terribly different from what's happened before in that sense. But with the change in the landscape, the timing really does feel right for a return. I mean, it kind of, you could say it's overdue, but it'll be welcome whenever it could happen. Uh, would be great. As for whether it would meet expectations when it comes out, that's really a question that I think would be answered by, in part, the conditions of development. If Jane Jensen is given pretty free creative reign to work on it without too many budgetary limitations. I mean, these are not like blockbuster game. It doesn't take a blockbuster game budget to make a really good adventure narrative. The remaster they've said it's a shoestring budget to make that game. I don't know how much funding came outside of the Kickstarter to do that or not, but I'm not one that could give reliable numbers on what a budget like this would be. But I would imagine, a couple $1 million would be
Hmm.
a pretty healthy start. maybe, maybe you need more. It kind of depends on whether it's Sins of the Fathers level for its time, which had the big voice acting budget. Or it had famous voice actors and a big marketing campaign and all that. I think it would be doable to make a fourth Gabriel Knight game that's low budget in the sense that it doesn't have to be on the absolute cutting edge of whatever today's current technology is, as the previous 3 games were. I mean, they were so revolutionary and innovative. Kind of closing out various eras of adventure game technology.
Yeah, no, I get what you. Yeah, I get what you mean. That there are most adventure games now released. They're not AAA titles. They're usually 1 or 2 people working on the games, and they're able to create great games and great content. That in some cases that looks like there's a big team and looks like they're expensive, but with all the tools available, it's possible to make a very good adventure game on, as you mentioned, a shoestring budget, which most games, like we talked about the Blackwell games, I don't know exactly how much they cost, but I don't think, again, this is mainly Dave Gilbert and forget the name, Chandler, I think, the artist working on the games, 2 people working on those games. And I'm sure that the budget wasn't very high, extremely high either. So, yeah,
and obviously, Gabriel Knight would probably necessitate a higher budget. We want to make sure that there's enough artists to share the load and not put things into a crunch or have it take forever and lose steam or anything like that. It definitely is something that it feels like it needs to have a real good, well-staffed team behind it. And I think, I don't know how many people worked on the Sins of the Fathers remaster, but I know that they definitely were working with a small budget.
You mentioned a little bit on the Petition website that if, again, you were successful with different ideas on how to make the game get funding, that you would, try, maybe start, if Jane Jensen got the rights, that you'd maybe try and start a fundraiser and give her, the money. You're trying to work with Activision. Is there anything at all that you can say that's, or just talk about? I know it's still very, very early.
Sure.
That's
what we
can't get into specifics yet, but
what I can say is that from our talks with Robert, they are not interested in pursuing a fundraiser themselves. If there is going to be a fundraiser, it would be something external from their involvement, whether it is a fan thing or a different studio that's able to come in and negotiate a deal and get a game made. So it is early to say. At first, for now, it's just kind of about, can we pull enough signatures together to prove that, assuming that everyone who signs is at least somewhat interested in actually putting down a little bit of money to buy the game. That should hopefully be a compelling argument for why it's worth greenlighting. Heck, if the 20,000 people that signed Tony's were willing to pay $30 for a copy of the game, that's over $500,000. It's $600,000. That's a good start. That's something. Yeah. I don't know what the budgets of the original 3 games are, but it's not anything to sneeze at. You could probably expect that there are fans now who would be happy to plunk down hundreds or thousands of dollars just to see the games come out as well.
Definitely, yeah. And so then, finally, because you've answered all my questions so far, how can people help right now? So where can they go to, see the signature and sign the signature? And do they have to give any money right now?
No one's beholden to any sort of obligation to plunk down any money.
So what can people do to help with this petition then?
Beyond signing it, which just takes a moment and is super easy to do. I think if you Google Gabriel Knight 4 petition, it should be one of the first things that pops up now. There's some fan pages on Facebook and Twitter under GK4 Petition. You can sign up for those too, and updates will be coming out from Tony about what comes from that. But also signing the petition, updates can be posted there. I think there's probably a way. I think you can get notified of new updates that are posted. Sort of like a Kickstarter in a way, where campaign updates will go out to people who've pledged, in the same way that on change.org campaign updates can go out to people who just sign. And signing is plenty for the time being. I guess beyond just signing it though, what really helps with projects like this is to have an attitude of faith that it can happen. We've seen a lot of pessimism, again, totally understandable, from people who've given up on hopes, because it hurts to hope for so long and be so disappointed.
I know. Again, having hopes dashed. But as I said, I remain hopeful. And even if it, doesn't happen, which hopefully will, at least, we're trying. And, from what you're saying again, that, you wanted to be, positive, create positive vibes and show that we really want this to happen. And I think, going back to my earlier question, too successful. Personally, I think if we do nothing, we'll definitely not get a Gabriel Knight 4.
Sure.
But if we can come together and just try, with the community, with Gabriel Knight fans, and even if you've never played Gabriel Knight, but see how much it means to people and fans of the genre, just even to sign, I think that could, help a huge amount.
Yeah.
Whatever the outcome, but. Yeah, definitely, to keep having faith.
Yeah, and even if a petition like this, doesn't play a part in a Gabriel Knight 4 coming out, it's at least bringing awareness to what great games these are. And if someone discovers these games in 2020 or later because fans are still talking about it, I mean, that's wonderful too. We want people to experience them because we know how much of an impact they had on us. How great it felt to be in those worlds and spend time with those characters. I envy the people who haven't played the games yet, who are going to be able to.
Absolutely.
When they hear about it.
I wish I could go back to playing them for the first time, because they would definitely, be high on my, favorite games list. But it's hard, like yourself, to pick one of them out of the three of them, because I love the three of them.
Yeah. I guess I have a soft spot for the second one, just how epic that story is, and just kind of the whole different shift in style took some getting used to. I remember my wife and I were both kind of like, man, this is really different. Doesn't sound like Tim Curry at all. Like, are we gonna be okay with this? And by the end, it was like, that was one of the most like sublime gaming experiences. Like, that story was just transcendently good.
Absolutely.
And I know that's not for everyone. I've tried to turn friends on to the series, and some love the games, and some take issue with some of the shortcomings that we've mentioned, and make it maybe hard for them to enjoy fully, kind of the more gamey aspects. But we are in an era now where narrative is kind of becoming king again, where a game story can be the main draw, and doing any sort of artificial mechanics to move the story along is, back in the day, it was kind of expected that you'd have some kind of, to put it mildly, like strange logic to progress a story in an adventure game. It's part of it's just comes with the territory.
Absolutely, even in the LucasArts games, it wasn't just one company or the other, but that was to be expected at the time.
For sure. And nowadays, games, there's so much more freedom in the format of how they can be, that there's not quite as many of those restrictions on like what the moment-to-moment gameplay is like in a game. And you can still have a huge audience that will be a huge audience of people made up of adventure game fans who may accept that. Like as you were saying, Life is Strange right now is one that you've been playing, and that's not a traditional adventure by any means. It's usually it's a kind of pretty different format. It's, I guess, in a way more of the modern Telltale kind of inspired, but taken a step beyond. Although I haven't played it, so I don't know if I should be talking about it too much.
No, you're right. I'll review it probably in the next episode. Well, talk about at least episode 1, season 1 that I just started playing a few weeks ago. But yeah, it is a kind of like Telltale meets Gone Home kind of way. But that's as you're saying, that narrative now is king, and Gabriel Knight still 20, 30 years later still has one of the best narratives, in all their games, even compared to games now. So it feels like if ever we're going to get it, the time is now.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. We'll see if it's successful or not. But even, at least we could say that, look, or you guys at least are saying, whatever happens, you tried absolutely everything you possibly could and more to make this happen and make people aware of, even if we get more people to play the 3 games, that's something.
Yeah, it is.
So thank you very much, John. I think that's all the question. I know we've been here, I've been keeping you
a
while.
All good. It is my absolute pleasure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because when I first heard about this petition, I thought, okay, I'd like to speak to someone who is involved. So thank you so much for agreeing to speak at such short notice. But we said to people, look, if you want these games of possibility, even best thing you can do right now is to go to the website. I will include a link in the show notes to the website and to the Twitter and Facebook page. And again, you guys are approachable, and Tony in particular is approachable. If there's anything that we haven't covered today, you can get in touch with him through Twitter and Facebook. I will include the links in the show notes. And yeah, but is there anything that you would like to say to people listening that we haven't covered, or anything at all? But we've covered a lot, so.
That's a very good question. I mean, I'm sure that afterwards I'm going to be like, oh boy, did I touch on this? Tony's going to be like, make sure you said that. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Yeah.
Pretty well. I don't want to keep you waiting for too long.
Oh no, don't worry. No, if anybody does have any questions, they can reach you on Twitter, Facebook. At least Tony is very responsive to any questions.
We'll see how that if that keeps up. If thousands upon thousands of people join the petition, I am worried that he might have a little trouble keeping up with the frequency of his communication if that were to happen. But it would be a great problem to have exactly. Too many people to talk about to. And I think it is important too that for the time being, I mean, Jane and Robert, they haven't been working on these games in a long time, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's important to kind of respect their privacy at this time, and let's not put any too much pressure on them for now. Let's just celebrate what they've made, and hope our hardest for more.
Definitely, I think that's a perfect way to end on. So thank you so much, Sean, for joining me, as I mentioned, at such short notice. And we will definitely keep in touch. I will be mentioning this in future episodes of the podcast as well. So we will be in touch. So thank you very much, and the very, very best of luck with this. I really hope that you guys succeed, or at least succeed in making people aware of the games and creating these positive vibes about the games, which I don't think anybody can say anything bad against. So well, thank you so much, and a very best of luck to you and Tony.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
So if you like the Adventure Games podcast, then please subscribe, rate, and review. Wherever you listen to podcasts, please leave a review on iTunes if you can, as every review helps, and reviews will help get the word out, especially for adventure game developers who appear on the podcast. Now, you can also follow me on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at AdventGamePod. You can follow me on Facebook at Adventure Games Podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram at Adventure Games Podcast as well. And we're also on Discord at Adventure Games Podcast. So if you are a adventure game developer or a adventure game player, you can follow us there. So again, please feel free to retweet and share podcast episodes and the podcast to people who you believe may enjoy it. And you can also find more information about the podcast on www.adventuregamespodcast.com. So until next time, thank you.